Okay. Now, we have been looking at ARM7 microcontroller from NXP, and this is one of the microcontrollers within the ARM series that we are studying. So I have actually included this in the syllabus because in the ARM part of the course. So we have been looking at this datasheet since many weeks now, and we already covered some of the key features of the microcontrollers. LPC213X, where X means there could be 3.1 until 3.8. So each of those microcontrollers are having different features, slightly different specifications, and that's why we have been actually studying the features in detail. We have also seen the block diagram of this ARM microcontroller, and we've seen that in this particular microcontroller there is an ARM code, ARM7 code, and there are a lot of peripherals, and there are different buses within the microcontroller. So ARM7 local bus or advanced high performance bus, or even ARM peripheral bus or advanced peripheral bus. There's lots of peripherals available within this ARM microcontroller. So we have seen all those things. We also had seen this pin configuration very briefly, where we had seen there are 64 pins available in this particular chip. For example, this is for LPC2131, but if you go to other microcontrollers like 2132, so it has almost the same pin configuration with slight differences or small changes in between. In our course, we will particularly focus on 2138, where most of the features or the maximum features are available within this particular series of microcontrollers. The ARM2138, basically you can see that for every pin, almost every pin, there are lots of alternate functions. So there is a port function, there is a A to D converter function, then there is an external interrupt function, then capture or timer functions. So this is just an example for pin number 15, but if you look at other pins, you can see there are a lot of alternate functions for all the pins in this microcontroller. Okay. The previous one is representing low profile quadrature flat pack 64. So this is one of the surface mount packages available for this ARM microcontroller. So this is a LQFP64, whereas the other package option, as we discussed, high voltage quadrature flat no lead 64 pin. So this is even smaller package. So this is just a 9 mm by 9 mm package, whereas the previous one was 12 mm by 12 mm, including the pins. So you can go through this data sheet in detail. You can actually see the port descriptions or the pin description for every connection that are available from this ARM microcontroller. So you can just go one by one at your own time. So I'll just take a few of them just to give you a sense. So let's take this particular pin. So I'm just randomly choosing any one of the pins from this list, where pin number 21 is representing. Now this 21 is same as basically this pin number 21 for both the packages that we discussed earlier, the QFN and QFP packages. So if you consider any one of the pins like pin number 21, so you can see there are lots of alternate functions. So in this case, there are 4 different purposes of this particular pin. So the basic purpose is port 0.1. So there are 2 ports in ARM7 microcontroller in this particular series, port 0 and port 1. And port 0 has up to 32 pins. So this is just port 0.1, which is multiplexed with RxD0. So whenever we use it as normal port, it is supposed to be input or output, and this is a digital input or output. Now if we use it for UART, universal asynchronous receiver transmitter receive mode, for with the same pin, we have to select the alternate function here, which is RxD0. So there are 2 different UART ports. So this is for 0th UART ports receives data line. You can also enable PWM mode. So this is from out of many channels of PWM. So it depends which microcontroller we are considering within this series. So like PWM 3 channel output is available, or even external interrupt input channel is also available over here. So that means there is a one port function and three alternate functions for this particular pin. You can see the configuration, the type I means input, O means output, and then you can see the description of each of those modes. Okay, or while selecting a particular purpose through the pin. Through programming and special function registers, we will explore how we can select this alternate functions or even the basic IO port function. You can go through this list. You definitely don't have to remember by heart, but you have to understand by reading that how each and every pin is slightly different from each other. So there are different set of functions or alternate functions. For example, if I take pin number 33, so it can be used as digital transmit output for UART or even PWM output, or even analog input. So this is analog to digital input for channel 1.1. That means this is for ADC1 channel 1. So it's written over here ADC1 input 1. So that means there are multiple channels from the ADC. So there are up to 8 channels from each of the ADCs, ADC 0 and 1. So this is connected, these are connected through the multiplexer. So again, if you go to each and every block like pulse width modulator or UART or even analog to digital or any other block, you'll find individual block diagram. So in case of ARM microcontroller, so there is a master block diagram that we just started that I had shown at the beginning of the class, which is the overall architecture of the microcontroller. But if you go to internal peripherals, then there are even equivalent block diagrams available for each of those blocks. This is not very simple one as we had seen in 8051. In ARM 7 or even any ARM microcontroller, so each and every block has its own block diagram. I'll just explore that in today's class. So you can keep on going through this list and then you will find that there are so many functions, and you just have to remind yourself that how each of those functions are related to the basic block diagram. So that means if you come to this particular block diagram of this overall microcontroller chip, then each and every block, each and every box that you get to see here, especially for the peripherals or even any other block on the upper side, they are having a particular block diagram in detail. Okay, so I will actually give you a short tour of how each of those look like, or rather some of those how they look like. So I just noted the PDF link to the user manual. So you will go to the user manual of this particular chip. So this document is datasheet. Okay, so this is called product datasheet. Now this product datasheet is also supplemented with another document which is user manual or hardware manual. You can see in this document that it is for the same series of microcontroller. User manual is there. This user manual is very important document because while writing codes, while developing programs for this microcontroller, you always have to refer to this manual, which is very often you need reference from this manual. Okay, so let's see what is there in this user manual in brief. So initially they are just looking after some revision history. We can ignore this. User manual is much more detailed document. You can see there is 297 pages over here, whereas the main datasheet was just 45 pages. So datasheet gives you an overview of features. It gives you the idea what the microcontroller is capable of doing. However, this user manual is an in-depth documentation for every feature that the datasheet mentions. So let's dive into the detailed part of this manual. So some part of the manual repeats information from the datasheet, so you can actually refer to it from both the sources. And okay, so let me just a moment. So we will straightway go to the general purpose input output part of this user manual. So what I'm trying to say is that every function or every block has a way to configure. So there are some special function registers there, and those special function register is a part of the internal block diagram of the features like GPIO, general purpose input output, or real-time clock, or serial peripheral interface, or any other that you get to see from this particular list. So I'll straightway take you to GPIO descriptions, and GPIOs are the general purpose input output which are multiplexed with other functions. So it is important to look at how this GPIO is controlled. Okay, so instead of writing the code just from scratch by looking at the examples, you have to understand how it is linked to the overall block diagram of this microcontroller. So give me a moment. I'll just go to the relevant portion first, and then I'll start again. Let me find that out. Yeah, so this user manual is a very large document. As I said, you have to basically go to a particular section, and in this case the index is given towards the end of this manual. I think they have updated it. Earlier version had the user this index right at the beginning. Anyways, so we'll start with the GPIO description of this ARM microcontroller. So this is chapter number 8 in this particular manual. So now let's look at the features. So every physical GPIO port is accessible via the group of registers. So these are the special function registers, providing an enhanced features and accelerated port access, or the legacy group of registers. So that means there are different ways to access this register. So there could be fast access like fast GPIO, there could be normal or legacy or old type of simple GPIO with slight more latency, and also there are alternate functions which are accessible through GPIOs. So that's what this first line is actually trying to say. Now this accelerated GPIO functions means, so there are certain registers which are relocated in the ARM local bus. So that means if you access anything through the local bus, so what is local bus? Local bus is something you have to remember and get connected with this block diagram. So ARM7 local bus is this one. Okay, so this local bus is meant for fast GPIO or SRAM or flash interfacing. Only these are the three features or three types of information that can flow over this ARM7 local bus. So that means in accelerated GPIO mode, you have access to ARM7 local bus. So that means it is linked to the fast access. That means there is very low latency, and then there are certain masked registers allow treating set of port bits as a group. So that means mask. What is mask? Mask is basically you can enable or disable certain pins out of this GPIO by using certain registers. So these are called mask register set. So through this registers, you can actually treat some of the ports in a group. So that means you, for a given type of communication or for a given type of data, for example, you want to update 8-bit data at a time. So that means you can actually make a set of 8 bits through the GPIO port, and then you can update it with a very low latency. So you can keep on reading this particular features, but more importantly, let's look at how to use this GPIO by using the SFRs. That's what is required for your coding, and for that, so you have to go to this register description. Okay, so first of all, there are two GPIO ports in this ARM7 microcontroller. So that is port 1, so 0 to 31. So there are 32-bit port 0, and then there is a port 1 which is 16-bit P1.16 to 1.31. So now, while accessing this GPIO, you have to look at this register set and what are the registers available that you can use for accessing GPIO. Now, students who have studied other microcontrollers like ARM, any other series, or even AVR series, you will find some similarity here if you have already worked. If not, that's not a problem at all. So just try to follow what I'm trying to explain here. Now this GPIO register map, so this indicates there are certain registers, a set of special function registers which are accessible for configuring the GPIO or exchanging data through GPIO. And this is possible while using the legacy APB accessible registers. That means APB is Advanced Peripheral Bus or ARM Peripheral Bus. So this ARM Peripheral Bus is this one in the block diagram. So this ARM Peripheral Bus interfaces with most of the peripherals or blocks, and within this peripheral block you have GPIO or general purpose IO, and those GPIO pins are can be accessible through APB, or it can be accessed through ARM7 local bus. Okay, the physical pins remain the same, their numbers also remain the same. Only thing is the difference is that if you access through APB, you have slightly more control, whereas if you access through ARM7 bus, then you will get lower latency but less flexibility while accessing with this local bus, but you get more flexibility or options to configure if you use through APB. So now this register sets, if you configure and use this registers, it goes to APB only. Now there are mainly these 4 registers which are available over here. So this is IO pin, IO set, IO direction, and IO clear. Okay, so IO pin, so let's look at the description one by one. So IO pin is the GPIO port pin value register. Okay, the current state of the GPIO configured port pins can always be read from this register regardless of the pin direction. Okay, so this is the value that is written on the pin, but the point is, what is that value? If you want to put it to the real pin as an output, then you have to use this particular register. So that means if you want to write logic 1 to any one of the pins, you have to use IO set equal to particular for that GPIO pin to be 1. And if you write 1 to this IO clear, so that means particular pin will be reset. So that means you have this port 0.0, for example, and if you want to write logic 1 to this port, you have to first configure the direction and so on, and then you have to write logic 1 to IO set register corresponding bit for 0.0, port 0.0. Whereas if you want to reset, or if you want to write 0 to this particular pin, which is possible by writing logic 1 to this IO clear registers. I will give you some example code for this, which will make it even more clear. But whether your IO set or clear will have any effect or not, that depends on IO direction. So this IO direction is general purpose IO port direction control bit. Okay, so this register individually controls the direction of each and every port pin. So that means whether it is input or output, so that direction can be controlled by using this IO direction. Okay, and in fact this IO pin is a register which configures whether you want to go with the basic input output mode or you want to go with the alternate function like A to D converter or PWM or any other peripheral function which is available for a given pin number, whether that is available. You want to enable either simple GPIO or alternate function through the GPIO pins. So then if you can, as you know, that GPIOs can also be accessed through the ARM7 local bus, and that is called fast GPIO. So and that fast or low latency GPIO can be accessed through another set of registers. So this set of registers are used if you use the ARM7 local bus for low latency, and then this fast input output direction and fast input output mask, then IO pin, IO set, IO clear. So except this mask is the new one. So this mask, fast mask register for the port, which is actually writes, sets or clears the reads to port. That means it done via writes to FIO pin, IO set and clear. So that means whether you want to enable or disable. So whenever you see this kind of term mask, so that means whether you are going to enable or disable the other controls given for the pin, so that can be accessed through this IO mask or fast input output mask. So this masking feature is not available in general purpose, the other one where APB was used. Okay, now look at one thing. So for every register, even in the previous blog table, you can see the type of access allowed. So for example, IO clear cannot be read, it has only write only kind of privilege. So you cannot read anything, you can only write to it. Whereas IO set can be read and write, and all other three registers are read or write. Now after reset, so the particular values are initialized. So that means you can reset the microcontroller, and after reset recovery, these registers are initialized to certain values, in this case 00s, and in the case of IO pin there is no initialization, so you have to do it, you must do it with your code at the beginning of your program, preferably. Okay, and then there are some port address pins. So now this address values represent 32-bit address, because there are 16-bit and 16-bit combined together, that is 32-bit address. It comes from the memory map of the microcontroller, and this memory map of the microcontroller is available. I'll show you the memory map, and this address values are different for port 0 and port 1. So that means IO pin is available separately for port 0 as well as for port 1. Similarly, this all other registers that you get to see, so they are having different physical addresses. So this is called physical address of a given register. We had seen physical address of special function registers in 8051 was just 8 bits. Okay, but in case of ARM7 it is all 32 bits, because it can access up to 4 giga space in the memory of this ARM microcontroller, because if you have 32 bits, so 2 to the power 32 is 4 giga locations, you can see. Now look at this. During the coding process, you should write in this particular format. So this is now a representation which is understood by the compilers for this ARM microcontroller, typically Keil or IAR, or there are other software like Crossworks for ARM or Cygwin. So there are different softwares through which you can write code and develop and compile the codes. So those compilers, or rather those integrated development environments, read this value of this port in this way, like port 0, then you just write the number and for the particular pin, and then dir, that means port 0 direction. So and then if you configure that as 0, it will be controlled as input. So that means direction for a given pin, if it is 0, it is input, and direction for a given pin is 1, it means it is output. So there are port 0x, that means x represents particular pin number in that port, and 0 or 1 indicates the main port number. Same over here for port 1 as well. Similarly, for every special function register that we came across, like fast type or normal type, it has its different address values. That means it has a different physical address location, and also it can be configured separately, depends on whether you go into the first mode or normal mode of GPIO. Now let's look at another block of this microcontroller where it is slightly more complicated than this. So what it is saying, that it is now giving, so rest of the pages that I'm scrolling now, so they are actually giving much more detailed information while you write your code in either fast mode or normal mode. So basically you can use this values or in this nomenclature or this way of writing syntax for during writing the code. So that means you should follow this nomenclature in your syntax while writing your C code or assembly code for this microcontroller. Okay, just let me scroll through once. You can have an example over here. So that's the beauty of this kind of user manual, where sometimes they give you exact example how to use it. So you can simply copy these statements in your C code or assembly code interface. So here you can see, suppose I want to use the value or I want to configure the value for port 0.7. So then they will set IO direction or P0 DIR. You can write either IO DIR, IO0 DIR or P0 DIR equal to this particular value. Okay, so this is, look at this value. So this is 0x, then there are 4 zeros, then there are 0080. So 0080 represents D7. Okay, so D7th bit, or which is port 0.7 in this case. So port 0, 7th bit has been set to 1. So if the 7 bit set to 1, that means it is configured as an output. So we had seen from the previous table, one of the tables that we had seen, that 1 means output mode for direction and 0 means input mode. So that we have set it to output. And then if I write 0, all the 0, and again this D7th position as 1 in this clear register, that means this port pin 0.7 goes to 0, logic low. And I want to toggle it to 1, that means port 0 and this particular pin when the set register is set to 1. So that means in both clearing or writing 0 process, you are writing with the same value but in the clear register. But if you want to write 1 into this particular 0.7, you have to write logic 1 to the set register for the same bit location. Okay, and again you can do the clear, so that means it will just make it 0, then 1, then 0, and so on. Okay, so this is a very simple example where they are setting the pins. Now instead of IO0 DIR, you can also write P08 P07 equal to P07 DIR equal to this one, this value, particular 0080 value. It's not necessary that you should always write so many zeros. You can simply write 0x80 also. 0x80. So that will automatically considered as a 32-bit number because this register itself is 32-bit. Now, for port 1, this lower 16 bits are not present. In such case, you have to use this all 32-bit representation. Okay, for port 1. For port 0, all 32 bits are present. So if you are working on any one of the lower bits, it's not necessary to write always those 32-bit representation. But for port 1, that is very important. You can look at other examples. So if you look after writing such code, if you use an oscilloscope, so this is how it will look like. So you can actually consider any one of the pins. I think it is for another example where they are configuring two pins using GPIO mode, port 0.12 and then 1.20. So then you can actually write zeros and ones to these IO ports and then configure it as per your necessity. Suppose you want to generate a synchronized signal for interfacing some peripheral. It may not be compatible with any one of the standard architectures like UART, but it may be your custom developed interfacing strategy. So in such case, you can do 1 and 0 combination over multiple bits simultaneously and then operate or communicate with that particular peripheral. Such thing is called bit banging process. So bit banging means you are manipulating the bits one by one. You are banging the bits to 0 or 1 as per your wish. Okay, now I'll go to ADC. I'll show you the ADC part now as a next. We'll come to this memory map, which is very important, but I'm trying to correlate with the GPIO with GPIO with other peripherals. Now this is something new that we haven't studied with 8051, but modern mixed signal microcontrollers offer both analog and digital features. And in this case, we will study the analog to digital converter block. So you can see that every peripheral block itself acts like a separate chip which has its own set of features, but everything is controlled by ARM7 core of the microcontroller, which is the processor part of the microcontroller. So coming to this ADC, it offers 10-bit resolution and it depends, basically the type of ADC is successive approximation register, SAR ADC. If you have studied SAR ADC in other subjects like analog or any other subject, you can come to know that there are different types of ADC like delta sigma, successive approximation register, then flash ADC, and there are other ADCs. Other types of ADC. So this is SAR ADC, successive approximation register is ADC, having 10-bit resolution. And whenever you come across this term analog to digital, that means you can apply analog voltage within a range, within some minimum or maximum range. In this case, 0 to 2.5 or 0 to 3, which depends on your hardware connection. And then it converts that analog value into some equivalent digital value. I think you must be knowing about the basics of ADC. Now, how this ADC is implemented and how this ADC is utilized rather is more important to us. So this ADC is coming with input multiplexing among 8 pins. So that means there are 2 ADCs, 0 and 1, and each ADC is having 8-bit multiplexer at the input. So that means there are total 16 analog inputs multiplex to two ADCs, and then that means you can simultaneously use these two ADCs while you need that, and you can configure that through your code. Now you can power down the ADC. That means if you don't need to use any ADC, then you can slip the ADC. Now, importantly, I told you that there must be some minimum and maximum range for this analog voltage, and that is determined by choosing this reference voltage, VREF. So this VREF is the ADC reference voltage. Again, you have to go back to the basics. Any ADC has this input dynamic range. That means the range of input voltage that it can reliably convert into digital value, and that input dynamic range is configured by setting this VREF. So in this case, the minimum is set to 0 and the maximum is set to VREF. Now VREF could be either 1 volt or 2 volt or even 3 volt, or 3.3 is the maximum actually in this particular ADC if you look at the specs, and it should never exceed the voltage VDD analog. Okay, now this VDDA is one of the pins which is available in the pin configuration, which is shown in the pin configuration, and it should never exceed. So typically VDDA can go up to 3.3. So up to 3.3 you can keep VREF. Now you can keep it below 3.3, but you cannot keep it negative voltage. So in this case, every voltage should be larger. The VREF should be larger than 0, but it should be less than equal to the applied voltage VDDA, which should be maximum 3.3. Now for converting each result, it takes certain time. In this case, it is 2.44 microseconds. So you can take a reciprocal of this. You can find the speed of conversion or the sampling rate of the ADC. So sampling rate is just a reciprocal of this conversion time. And then there are different modes in the ADC. So suppose you want to convert many times at a go, then there is a burst conversion mode. So that means it will do multiple conversions one after another automatically, and then keep on updating the data into the memory. So that means it will keep on doing conversion, update into memory, then go to the next memory, do the next conversion, update that data into the next memory location, and so on. So that is called burst mode of conversion. Okay. And then you can have other controls, like you can link or connect the ADC with the timer such that it can actually the ADC sampling rate. So you need not go to the maximum sampling rate while going to this 2.44 microseconds, but you can instead control with the timer. So it's like when the timer overflows, the ADC will do one conversion or one set of burst conversion. So that is also possible. And then there are different ways to enable the ADC. That is, so you can start the ADC by using timer or by using some software configuration through the SFRs, special function.
Okay, sorry, there is a power cut at IIT, so the connection got missed. So I'm now on mobile data. You can experience some power, some interruption also in speed. Okay. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Yeah. So there is a power cut, so that's why the interruption came up. So let me open. Come back. Just. So let me plug on my laptop. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So this ADC, we are looking at the ADC of LPC 2138, and we discussed that ADC. There are two ADCs with certain features, and we have to set the features of this ADC. Now in microcontrollers, this hardware features like selection of VREF or the speed of conversion or sampling rate. So everything is configured by means of those registers. And there are special function registers dedicated to ADC operation. And those ADC SFRs must be considered for your particular purpose. Okay, so now the point is for every peripheral, whichever peripheral we must be talking about, must have been receiving the clock signal from the core of the microcontroller. So what was the core of the microcontroller clock? So there are some phase lock loop and system functions through which the crystal oscillator is connected outside, or the crystal is connected outside, the oscillator is inside the chip. Now the system clock gets divided by certain factor, and then it comes to all these peripherals. So while we talk about the A to D converter, so A to D converter must be receiving a smaller clock frequency from the system clock itself. Okay, so you have to consider always that in mind. So now the point is here, it is written that the clock could be up to 4.5 megahertz in case of this ADC. So the microcontroller can run at 60 megahertz, whereas you have to divide the clock frequency, and at max you are allowed to apply 4.5 megahertz to the ADC. And obviously ADC itself utilizes this clock for its purpose, and then effective conversion time comes to 2.44 microsecond if you are applying your clock at the maximum rate. If you reduce this clock, obviously your conversion time is going to be different. It should be longer. Okay. Now, so there are some pins associated. So these are the hardware connections. So from the pin diagram, you will be able to find this particular pins from your pin configuration diagram. So there are some ADC input pins which are multiplexed with other GPIO and other functions. And these are all input category. These are analog input category. So, and then you can set the VREF. Now, VREF, there are two different types of VREFs in this microcontroller, or in most of the mixed signal microcontroller, there is an internal VREF. Also, there is a provision for an external VREF. So the internal VREF is a fixed value. It is typically 2.5 volt or 3 volt. It depends how the manufacturer has designed this internal VREF. Or externally, you can apply the VREF and override the internal VREF. Okay, so in this case, this VREF indicates the external pin which is available in the microcontroller. Now, apart from that, there is a separate power supply terminals or pins available, VDD-A and VSS-A. Why are these available? Because analog and digital circuits are not so straightforward if you want to use them together within a chip especially. Why? Because of noise coupling. Digital circuits make transition from 0 to 1, 1 to 0 and so on, and there are so many digital blocks in the microcontroller. It's mostly digital. So there is clock feed through the digital lines, from the digital lines. So it's like that. If you keep a digital circuit next to an analog circuit, like ADC next to the microcontroller bus or any other block of the microcontroller processor, in such case, the digital noise can affect very adversely to the analog performance. I mean, suppose you want to convert 10 millivolt signal by using this ADC, and your VREF may be any voltage up until 3 volt, but input is 10 millivolt. So 10 millivolt for digital is 0, so it falls within the noise margin limit, so it doesn't make a lot of difference. But for analog, that 10 millivolt, if it gets some clock noise or it gets to clock feed through noise from the other digital block, so it can be adversely affecting the actual voltage. So that means that 10 millivolt will get changed to some other voltage, something like it may come to 9 millivolt or it may go to 12 millivolt and so on. So that means those few millivolt error in the analog signal may result within the microcontroller chip. So that's a very big problem, and it happens due to parasitic capacitance within the chip. So if you put multiple metal lines within the chip, you have studied in VLSI analog. So those metal lines, between those metal lines, it forms parasitic capacitance, and those parasitic capacitance can help you to inject some noise unnecessarily to the analog circuit, and that noise affects. So to get rid of that, it is preferred to isolate the power supply. So power supply isolation is important, because if you keep a separate VDD, separate VSS for the analog part, then even if the parasitic capacitance will be present, but there should not be any closed loop path for the feed through noise. That means you cannot inject noise from the digital to analog very easily if you have a separate power supply lines. That means you can have a separate battery connection for VSS and VDDA, and separate for VDD VSS for the digital part. So you can see from the pin configuration in the data sheet. So if you look at this pin number 5150, this is simple VDD VSS. So these are the digital VDD and digital VSS. But if you look at this VDDA, and you must be having VSSA somewhere. So you can find for VSSA somewhere, and that will serve as the supply lines for the analog circuit. Now look at this 63, which is VREF. So this 63 indicates the analog input for the reference for the A to D converter. So this is VSSA, which is 59. Okay, so look at this VSS, this VREF as well as VDD are quite separate. They are not multiplexed with others. Why? To make it low noise, as low noise as possible. So that means you can completely have two different batteries, one battery connected to the digital VDD VSS, other one to the analog VDD VSS. Okay, but you are also allowed to short VSSA with VSS normal. Similarly, you are also allowed to short VDD with VDDA. Now, if you short VDDs for digital and analog, it will be slightly more noisy, but it is acceptable. There is nothing wrong inside, so there should not be any short circuit. Obviously, you cannot short circuit A with VDDA with VSS, so that is not allowed, obviously, so that you can guess. Okay, now for the ADC, you'll find a bunch of registers like ADCR. So all those registers which are given over here are for ADC configuration. I'll come to them. So Yeah. So this ADCs are having, as you see, you have seen that there are different registers, and then this registers, the special function registers, all special function registers are separate for AD0 and AD1. That means analog to digital converters 0 and 1, and they have certain reset values. They have certain access modalities or allowed access modalities like read, write, or only read, or only write, or so this kind of access permissions are preset by the hardware designers, like the manufacturer. Okay, so you have to study these registers in detail, and all these registers are mapped with 32-bit addresses, but not necessarily all these registers are 32-bit, because your data is only 10 bits. So you have to see that even if those 32-bit registers are used, but which 10 bits are useful for your converted data. So you can go through this register definitions, like control register for A to D converter, and this controls basically what should be the clock, what should be the input pins, or what should be the conversion time. So those parameters are controlled, or various parameters are controlled by this control register. Now, global data register. So register contains the ADC's done bit and the result of the most recent A to D conversion. Means the result of conversion. So the 10-bit converted digital value can be stored in this particular register. Along with that, so it indicates that which ADC has finished, or which channel of the ADC has finished converting the data, because conversion takes certain time. You have seen 2.44 microsecond typically, and that is basically the fastest speed of conversion that it can be done. And once the conversion is done, for which multiplexer channel it is done, it gets updated in this register. Similarly, there is a status register which is also shows not just done but also overrun condition. Like if you are overwriting something, or you are basically you have done one conversion and the second conversion is also completed, but you haven't read the previous value. So that means you are actually overwriting your previous data, that you are about to miss the previous data. So that is basically overdone condition flag. So that means if you are not reading, you are just asking the microcontroller to do conversion, but not reading the data on time. So that is a problem, and that problem is indicated by this status along with the which bits are done. Then you can actually enable interrupts. So then there is basically start register and interrupt register are very important, as important as others obviously. So the start register means you can individually start converting from each of the bits of the ADC channels, and those basically start conversion, or basically the start control is done through this GSR bit. So you have to look at the detailed view of each of those registers. And then there is A to D interrupt enable. So ADCs can be connected with the interrupt sources, or that means whenever the conversion is completed, ADC can be allowed to generate an interrupt to the microcontroller, such that you don't have to always wait and poll when the ADC has completed its conversion. It's like you have started conversion and you have to wait for 2.44 microsecond, for example. And that 2.44 microsecond is a very long time for the main microprocessor ARM7. So why to wait for 2.44 microsecond? Instead, you just enable interrupt. So whenever the ADC will be completed, will complete its conversion after starting, it will generate an interrupt and tell the microcontroller, and then microcontroller will take the processor will go to the interrupt subroutine and it will do the servicing of the interrupt. And then there are result registers. So this result register basically stores the converted data, this 10-bit converted data in this case, in this particular for different channels, in this particular set of registers for various channels. So for channel 0 or channel 1, there are two different data registers, and you will see the format of these registers as I go along. Okay, so similarly, so there are lots of data registers. So now these data registers are available because each ADC is having 8 channels, AD0 to AD7, and that's why there are 8 different data registers for various multiplexer channels. Now, through this select register, ADC select register, it selects which of the ADCs actually you are going to convert or use it for conversion. So in ADC, at ADC input, there is something called sample and hold. So you have to revise those analog concepts from the other subjects. So the SAR ADC, successive approximation register ADC, requires a sample and hold circuit. Sample and hold is nothing but a simple capacitor that stores the instantaneous value of the input voltage until it gets converted by the ADC. Okay, so this sample means it sample or it collect the sample voltage and it stores it until the conversion is done. So it actually selects which sample and hold channels are required or which capacitor. So every input is associated with some sort of capacitors, sampling capacitors, and that sampling capacitor should be enabled by using this select lines. And if you enable the sampling capacitor, obviously that particular channel will be enabled or will be ready for doing the conversion. That is one part of making an ADC ready before its conversion. Now there is a clock divider. So as I said, every peripheral block receives the clock signal from the main system clock, and the system clock gets divided by certain factors for every peripheral or most of the peripherals. And this clock diff is a register which sets how much the peripheral clock should be scaled. So that means there are 2 levels of scaling. The system clock can run up to 60 megahertz, and you are dividing it with with certain factor and calling it an AP clock, which is peripheral clock, and the CC clock or C clock is, or core clock is the main clock, 60 megahertz, and this P clock is the reduced version of code clock, which is APB clock also, because it is for advanced peripheral bus peripherals. And then further, clock div helps you to divide that frequency. So let's say P clock can be 10 megahertz, and you can divide that into some other by certain factor to make it a smaller value. And in this case, ADC can only accept up to 4.5. So based on what is the value of P clock, you have to set the value of this clock div in order to set the particular frequency of operation. Now you can set the burst mode like group conversion mode, so you can make multiple conversions one after another. So that is burst mode of conversion. So a group of conversion happens in a succession, and then there are different clocks which are available. So there are basically this clocks is slightly different than clock div. Okay, so this clock indicates the accuracy of conversion. Now, how do I say this? This clocks indicates that how many cycles of clocks will be utilized for every conversion of a sample voltage. Okay, so you have done sampling, and then you are determining how long you are going to spend for every conversion. So smaller the number of clocks, it is faster indeed, but accuracy is also compromised. And larger the number of clocks per conversion is actually preferred, or rather because you can actually use it for smaller speed but higher accuracy. Now you have to see that this 11 clocks per 10 bit versus 4 clocks per 3 bits. So this indicates that there are different accuracy levels which are possible to be selected. You can actually select different accuracy levels for the ADC by selecting. The core idea over here is, if you spend more number of clocks per conversion, your result is more accurate. Accurate means what? You are having less distortion in the converted data. So there is something called linearity. So I have to dive more into this mixed signal concepts where integral and differential linearity concepts exist for this ADC. You don't have to go in detail into those concepts, but just remember that more number of clocks per bit, if you can select, that means more accurate is your result. That means indirectly we are saying that there is less non-linearity in the conversion process. Okay, and then there is a powered down signal, so you can slip the ADC and so on. Okay, so you can then you can go to each and every register like this control register. So then you can select so different bits. So look at this particular control register. There is 26 to 24 are used for starting the ADC. It's like start of conversion operation. Whereas there is also age, so which selects basically whether the falling age of a particular external signal or rising edge of the external signal can also start. So you can start the ADC not just by software control, but also through some hardware control by selecting the edge of an external signal. So capture or match signal is one of the pins which is multiplexed with GPIOs, and through those pins also you can select a particular edge of the input signal, and then you can start the conversion. Okay, but look at this particular, there are certain bits which are actually unused. Okay, so there are some reserved bits, so whichever is not shown in this particular table, so all other bits are reserved bits. That means you are not allowed to use those bits. Even if you use it, it doesn't have any effect on this ADC at least. Okay, and then if you go to, if you similarly you can go to all other registers one by one, like global data register. So this result indicates that which ADC has converted or finished its conversion. So it is basically a done kind of conversion signal, or traditionally speaking, people used to call it end of conversion. So that means once you start the ADC, it will end its conversion after certain delay, and after that delay, the end of conversion signal comes out. And in the older ADC, where microcontrollers were not having the separate, not having internal ADC, separate ADCs were used, separate integrated chips were used for ADC. In that case, this particular done signal is called as end of conversion, which was available as separate pin. Okay, and then there are some basically channel controls. So these bits contain the channels from which results bits were converted. So that means it have a status signal. It's kind of status signal that from which channel the conversion actually ran. And in, let's say there are some overrun and done, also some other done bits where this bit is 1 in burst mode if the result of one or more conversions were lost. So I say that if you keep on doing conversion, but you're not reading it on time, you're not updating or getting the value copied on time. So the microcontroller keeps track of that also. So that is called an overrun condition. So it actually indicates whether you have already started losing some data due to mismanagement of timing in your code. And this is basically end of conversion status, and you are actually enabling. So this result controls a binary fraction representing the voltage on this, selecting the self field, select field. So SCL is select field divided by the voltage on the VDDA V by Vref. Okay, so now you have to know that how does the ADC value basically how do we map a digitally converted data from an analog data? So there is an equation for every ADC. So there's the input voltage divided by full scale range into Vref. So there is an equation actually. So this input voltage, this is V, divided by reference voltage, which is the full scale voltage. So this is the maximum input voltage multiplied by, basically you can actually select this particular equation. So for having a relationship between the digital converted value and the output value, and the 0 in this field indicates the voltage was less than or equal to. So that means if you are applying, sorry, actually there's a little mistake I have done. Sorry for the result thing. So if there is a slightly different voltage beyond that range of voltage, like you are allowed to apply 0 to Vref, right, at the input of the ADC. Now, if the result, if the voltage is beyond the range, then obviously it will be a problem. So ADC cannot resolve or cannot convert into a particular digital value correctly, and that is actually indicated whether it is equal, less than or equal to or greater than that particular value of Vref. So whether it is within the range of allowed voltage or whether it is outside the range. You can actually go through each of the bits. You don't have to remember at all. As you can see that I am actually referring to this kind of information while writing the code. So while developing the code initially, so you can always keep this kind of documentation on your side, and you can keep on referring to these bits one by one and just look at how they are organized. Make sure that their locations are correct while you develop coefficients for writing your code. Okay. So now I will actually go to the memory map. So we have seen GPIO, ADC, and all those things. That's definitely important peripherals we must study. Even all the peripherals we must study. But the point is how those peripherals are actually mapped, or rather where to write the code for those peripherals while using this microcontroller. So that's where actually this memory map is important. So memory map is a customized memory distribution diagram where the physical addresses are shown for various operations or features, like the peripheral features or the code or SRAM. So all those features are actually mapped into a range of memories or memory locations. In this case, in case of this ARM7, it operates up to 4 gigabytes. So this 4 GB comes from 2 to the power 32. And this is the 32-bit number represented in hexadecimal. So if all the digits are 1 in those 32 bits address, then it represents 4 gigabyte, which is the max for this microcontroller. So different ARM microcontroller have different range of addresses for the memory map. Okay, now let's look at it from this memory map point of view. Let's start from the 0 memory location onwards. So LPC 2131 has 32 kilobytes. So obviously it goes up to 7 FFF location. But as I said, we are more interested in 2138. So that means 2138 has memory for code, so which is non-volatile memory or the flash memory. So which is from 00 until this 7 FFFF. So until this entire location is reserved for flash memory. So suppose if you are using any other microcontroller like 2131, in such case, this range of memory locations are unused. Okay, so from this 8000 to 7 FFFF is unused for 2131. For 2132, obviously some other portion is unused. I think this is very obvious. Now there is some reserved address space. So this is the manufacturer's choice. We cannot do anything over here. So there is some reserved space for future expansion. And typically, if they come out with newer version of microcontroller, so maybe beyond 2138, so they must be utilizing. For example, there is 2148 microcontroller available, which came after this 213. So 2148 has USB controller and some more memory, 1 MB of memory instead of 512 kilobyte. 2148 I'm talking about, which is not shown in this datasheet obviously. So that reserve space is utilized for future enhancement. So in this case, future is already available. So future of 2138 is available, that is 2148, where some part of this reserved space has been utilized. Then after this reserve space, there is a group of memory locations reserved for SRAM or static RAM. Again, different microcontroller numbers are having various RAM sizes. So if you are considering 32 kilobyte in 2138, then it starts from this 4 and then all these zeros until this 4,000, then 7FFF. Up to this location, this entire RAM space is located. So all this static RAM and non-volatile flash, everything is within the chip, right? Now, if you need to access anything beyond this RAM, let's say you want to put some extra RAM outside or put some extra memory, non-volatile memory outside, you have to always use this reserve space. Given the reserve space should be properly addressed by using your code. Now, there are other reserve space. Now, another important thing is this boot block for on-chip, remapped from on-chip flash memory. So this is basically a type of flash memory. This is also a non-volatile memory, but it has certain pre-programmed little portion of code which is already pre-programmed in the microcontroller. That means while you purchase this microcontroller, a part of the code is already there in the boot block, and this is something that you cannot change, or rather it is not preferred to change this particular, even if it is allowed, because if it is flash, it will be allowed to change, but it is not recommended. So if you, unless you really need to upgrade this boot program. So this boot program is something that comes into picture while you start a microcontroller. During normal operation, it will take you to this non-volatile memory for execution of the code. During programming mode, or let's say while you start the microcontroller first time, you want to program this flash. So during that time, this boot code comes into picture. Then there are lots of reserve space, and then a bunch of peripherals. So this APB is that peripheral bus, advanced peripheral bus peripherals. So that means the ARM peripherals are all present over here. That means all the SFRs, those ADC special function registers or GPIO SFRs that we had seen so far, they are all located within this address range. So if you look at the datasheet or the user guide, at least what we had seen earlier, some memory locations, right? Look at the memory locations here in this diagram or in this table. So ADCCR, this control register, is having an address with this E something, right? Look at this E something is this APB peripherals. So this is how it is linked. You have to find that link, that this special function registers for the ADC or GPIO or even all other peripherals are all marked or mapped within this APB peripherals. Now there are some AHB peripherals where the trace module or the boundary scan or debugging registers are present over here. So someone asked me through, I think, MS Teams or email, I guess. I'm going to answer all the questions one by one. What is the address for those trace module, or how to trace registers are mapped? Suppose I want to trace something from this APB. Let's say I want to read the value, what is going on in this registers of ADC. So what I'll do, I will have access to this AHB. That means there are some embedded trace registers and there are debugging registers through which I can get a copy of the values from the APB registers. So you can directly copy the value if it is read operation is allowed or not. Okay, so this is allowed. If read is allowed, obviously you can copy directly from this particular registers, but that will take some time from the microcontroller. So that means the processor should not be engaged if you are doing some tracing or debugging. So that means, so the values are copied to AHB. Now look at one thing. So there are some write only and read only registers. So that means you can write to this register under normal mode. But if you want to read this register, so it is not directly allowed through APB channel, but it will be allowed through the embedded trace channel, which is controlled by AHB peripherals, like advanced high performance bus peripherals, where the high-speed data communication can happen without disturbing the peripheral or normal operation of the microcontroller. So this memory map is again very important. Again, you don't have to remember by heart. You have to understand what is going on. What is the link? Where are the basically what are the consideration points while writing your code? So those things like address range, like the area from where it should be accessed, like this SFR from the E something locations and so on. Okay, so this I can keep on talking about this huge document, but it is not recommended to spend that much time because you can, if you understand what I told you through the GPIO and ADC, I'm just trying to communicate you the method of reading this kind of huge documents. Okay, and once you adopt this method, so you can easily start writing the code. So let's say even without reading anything else from this user manual, you can start writing a simple code to interface GPIO and ADC. Okay, just by reading this kind of registers. Obviously, there are some example codes available for using this register sets for doing some A2D conversion or any other purpose, and you can simply go and read some part of this manual and then adopt it in your code. Typically, this memory map is considered automatically within the compilers and linkers. Okay, so I'll talk about after this ARM, we'll talk about embedded system development, and then we'll have two parts, software and hardware. So far we have spoken about hardware part to quite some extent through 8051 and ARM, but embedded software is also another certain important thing where the operating system, embedded operating system will be considered. And while that embedded OS or real-time operating systems are used, so those OS considers this kind of addresses very closely. Okay, as a normal coding engineer, we don't consider the physical addresses very close. We don't examine them very closely on daily life. It is important to know, but it's not critical. But for programmers who develop operating systems or who develop system level code like boot code, so they must have very close idea or very good idea about how to utilize this memory locations and how to keep track of them while writing those system level codes. So in embedded system, so we generally don't expect you to write boot code or operating system code, but you need to understand the basis and the link between the hardware and software very closely. Okay. Now the next part is the interrupt controller. The interrupt is very powerful in this microcontroller, in ARM7 microcontroller. So interrupt is one of the ways to make a processor or microcontroller more efficient or more powerful. So the interrupt structure is very complex in modern microcontrollers. In fact, this microcontroller has relatively easy interrupt structure, and it has several layers of interrupts. So if you remember, earlier we talked about hardware interrupt and software interrupt with 8051, right? So hardware interrupt is some pin which is generating interrupt. Software interrupt is some software value which is generating an interrupt to the microcontroller. Now those interrupts can be again further classified, or rather you can categorize them in different types, such as the fast interrupts and normal interrupt. Like that fast GPIO and normal GPIO, there is only difference in latency and obviously some features. So full features are available if you are slowly moving. So, and whereas the fast interrupts are similar to that, or rather similar analogy applies to fast and normal interrupt. So normal interrupt here in ARM7 is called vector interrupt, or IRQs, interrupt requests, and FIQ is fast interrupt request. So in terms of priority, FIQ has the highest priority, and vectors interrupt are having middle priority. Okay, and there are some non-vectored interrupts having the lowest priority. So there are 3 levels of priorities which are available for this microcontroller. So fast, highest, vectored, middle, and non-vectored, lowest. Now, what do I mean by vectored and fast in detail? So apart from latency, in fact, FIQs are also some type of vectored interrupt request. Vectored means what? Vectored means some memory location associated interrupt. That means if a particular interrupt comes, how or where the processor will jump. So which memory location in the code space it will jump. So that is vectored location. Okay, so vectored memory location. And whenever interrupt comes, it goes to vectored memory location. Same for FIQ also. But there are certain generic ways where non-vector interrupts are there. That means if the interrupt comes, some status will be generated within the microcontroller, but it will not jump directly to some memory location. So that means the memory location is not defined. So that is non-vectored interrupt. So that means whenever non-vectored interrupt comes, it has to wait a long time or longer period of time if the other interrupts are coming simultaneously. So that means if you get FIQ and vectored interrupt request, then FIQ will be served first and vectored interrupt will be served later on, even if both of them may be generated simultaneously. Let's say two peripherals are generating interrupt at the same time, at the same instance of time. So at that time, one of them will wait and other one will get higher priority. It will be executed first. Once it completes, the code executes the interrupt request interrupt subroutine, then only it goes to the interrupt subroutine of the lower priority interrupt. And then if there is a non-vector also waiting simultaneously, then the location will be or status will be determined, and then the location will be determined through the code for this non-vector type of interrupt. So it's inherently it is non-vector, but if you want to service any interrupt, it has to go to some subroutine, and that subroutine must have some address location. So that vectoring process should be done in your code, but it's not inherently available in the microcontroller. Now there could be different interrupt sources available in case of this LPC microcontroller. You can see over here there are interrupt sources like which are listed over here, and look at this channel numbers. Okay, so this table shows the interrupt sources coming from almost all the blocks from the block diagram, and those blocks are actually just listed over here along with their VIC channel numbers, and each channel is associated with some memory locations. So like watchdog timer comes first because watchdog timer, if you remember, I talked about this earlier. Watchdog is a type of timer which automatically overflows after a certain period of time, let's say after 1 millisecond or so, or it may be smaller or larger also. And it interrupts the microcontroller and tells that, okay, don't forget about other work. Don't just get bogged down with one program. Okay, so that is what is watchdog timer is doing, and watchdog interrupt gets generated once the timer overflows or once the watchdog timer overflows. Normal timer has different interrupt request channels. Okay, and then there is embedded code, embedded ICE for debugging, transmit and receive signals. And this in-circuit emulation, that means you are reading or you are trying to trace what is going on in other registers, which interrupt is there or not. So all those things can be also controlled by another set of interrupt, which is of higher priority. See, the channel 0 has the highest priority within this VIC. So that means VIC is a vectored interrupt request. Okay, VIC, vectored interrupt controller, in fact. Okay, VIC, vectored interrupt controller. And VIC is coming or is referred to as vectored IRQs. That means vectored interrupt request a service through this vectored interrupt controller. And the lower the channel number, higher is the priority. So that means within this medium priority group, there are sub priorities, and you can see the highest one within this medium priority group is watchdog timer. That means if an operating system is running, so whether you want to read anything or not, or whether you want to change any value or not, so that should not interrupt or that should not delay your actual sequence of operation in your operating system at all if you are using an operating system. So that's why WDT is highest priority within this VIC channels. And then if you want to read something from anywhere in the microcontroller, so obviously you have to use this in-circuit emulation or debugging interfacing. So that has the second most priority. Okay, so then you have, in fact, so I just skipped one over here, the software interrupts. The software interrupts are available. So through your code, you can immediately disrupt anything, almost anything in your microcontroller except watchdog. Even watchdog can be disabled or enabled. You cannot interrupt it once it is started. Okay, but you can disable or enable watchdog. So there is a fine thing that you have to understand. By using software control, you can enable, disable watchdog, but once the watchdog is enabled, then the software interrupt comes as lower priority, just one step lower priority, because once you write your code, so once the particular code which might be generating an interrupt should not be delayed, and that's why it is having one of the higher priorities within this list. So similarly, you can see there are other things like timer as coming next. The timer is having again one of the higher priorities or the lower number in this VIC channel, because timers are important, because if you lose time, you may actually end up in a very disastrous situation, because microcontrollers can be used for even life-saving equipments like medical equipment or even industrial safety monitoring or any other purpose, where timers also play a very important role. Then after timing, the communication part comes into picture. Then the communication part, basically this means UART. Now, if you look at this, each of this timer or UART, then there are different even sub levels of interrupts. That means there are different types of situations which may be generating the interrupts. Okay, so this UART can generate interrupt with the receive line, or basically even it can do with the transmit. It can also generate interrupt while there is a timeout. So suppose you are waiting for certain character to achieve receive, and then that character doesn't come at all. So that is called timeout indicator. Okay, character timeout indicator. So you are waiting for someone to send you data through RX, and there is nothing comes. So that is timeout indicator for character timeout indicator. Whereas RX line status is something different. You have already received something, and then you want to generate interrupt, or you expect an interrupt to be generated. So that is RX line status. So receiving has been done, then interrupt is coming. And then there is a transmit holding register. So that means basically you have already completed your transmission, and there is an empty register which is lying around, and you want to generate an interrupt once your transmission of a byte or particular word is completed. Okay, so a slight change actually in my description. So RX line status and RX data available is slightly different. What I told you with this one is RX data available. So whenever RX receive data is available and you haven't read it during that time, you can generate an interrupt, and that is called RX data available. But the line status is basically that whenever, so this indicates the certain handshake status. So sorry about this slight change in this description. RX line status, if you look at the pin configuration of this microcontroller, you will find that there are handshake lines which are available like this: DTR, DSR, DCD, CTS, RTS. So this RTS, CTS, DSR, DTR, DCD, so and also RI, ring indicator. So this lines are all supporting lines to this RxD and TxD of UART. Okay, so the full UART or the full-fledged communication with handshaking includes RTS, CTS, DSR, DTR, DCD, and RI. Okay, so ring indicator, data code detect, data terminal ready, data set ready, clear to send, request to send. Okay, so this names you can just listen for now. You don't have to remember. So if you practice it, you'll automatically start remembering them. So these are the handshake lines which helps RxD and TxD to achieve a reliable communication. So although UART uses RxD TxD in its basic form, it is an asynchronous communication. That means there is no clock signal, right? If you remember, UART doesn't have a clock signal. Now, the clock signal, instead of clock signal, they use some sort of handshaking signals. So this handshaking signals, basically, there are too many of these handshaking signals because earlier, before internet, people used to use some sort of carrier and some sort of telephonic connection, like modem based connection, like ring indicator and so on, for data communication, for slow speed data communication, and that's why these signals were present. These are not very commonly used these days, but very important earlier. So due to this additional signals, these are called line status. So the line status is given by those lines, and that is why this Rx line status interrupt is also important and which is considered over here. Similarly, for UART1, you can see some more lines. Yeah, I'll talk about 8051. Yeah. Yes, question.
Yes, sir. Can you go up?
Yeah.
So the Rx data available, this interrupt is essentially when your Rx time gets pulled low, right? For this start bit.
No. This Rx data available whenever the stop bit goes to 1 instead.
Okay, so this is basically when the transmission is complete. Is that
exactly?
okay? But there are interrupts for transmission of start also, right? Or no?
No, there is no interrupt for transmissions to be started. So because that is not important to us. So we are only concerned whenever something has been completely received, all the bits are received as per the configuration of the UART module.
Okay, got it.
And similarly, whenever the transmission is completed, then only we have to transmit second byte or next byte. So at that time, interrupt is important. So nothing is interrupted if the transmit starts or receive starts. It always happens at the end of the transmission or end of the reception process. In both the cases, after the stop bit goes 1, this transmit holding register and this Rx data available interrupts are generated. And look at this modem status. So modem status is basically, again, what I just said. So before internet happened through fiber optics and all these DSL lines, people used modems over phone lines. And those, at that time, this kind of signals were used. And that's why this kind of interrupt is also essential. Now, there is slight difference between the line status and modem status interrupt. The modem status interrupt depends on the ring indicator signal, RI signal, okay? RI and DCD signal, data carrier detect or data code detect. So how this modem used to work, you have to understand that in order to understand what I'm saying. So whenever you send any signal over a long distance, whether it is wireless or wired, we do modulation of signals. That means there is a high frequency carrier signal, and on top of it, we do amplitude modulation or phase modulation or frequency modulation. So this modulation is related with some carrier. So that's why data carrier detect or data code detect signal is there. And along with that, the ring signal is there. So that is basically the modem, whether the modem is ready or not. So that kind of signals are there over here. Whereas Rx line status is more closely related to RTS and CTS signal. RTS means request to send and clear to send. It's like a clock-like signals along with the UART signal. So RTS, CTS signals are specifically for this line status because line is ready or not. Okay, clear to send, request to send. So one guy is sending request to the other guy, and then the second other guy starts sending the data or receiving the data. Okay, so that is called line status interrupt. So similarly, you can go over this list where PWM channels are there, I2C or inter-integrated circuit. These are I2C SPI are serial communication. SSP is also type of SPI that we discussed, but slightly different. Once one of the hardware pins is different, F-sync is there in SSP, which is not there in SPI. So all this communication protocols, timer, pulse width modulation, phase lock loop, even the PLL lock, because PLL lock is important because once you start the microcontroller, or if you change the speed of operation for the PLL, so what is that PLL thing? If you remember this particular diagram, so the phase lock loop actually is placed between the core clock and the between the oscillator and the core clock, and PLL acts like a frequency multiplier, right? And frequency multiplier uses this divider and this kind of feedback, and this feedback loop takes certain time to stabilize. That is called lock-in time for the PLL. So this PLL lock-in time is actually kept into consideration. It has been measured by some analog circuit inside, and it converts and generates some digital interrupt. So if you change the PLL divider, that divide by n thing, if you change this coefficient to here, so it takes certain time to stabilize, and that stabilization time is called lock-in period for the PLL. And that PLL lock-in interrupt is also there because before the PLL stabilizes, you should not target any critical operation. So that's why for reliability purpose, it is there. So in 8051, these were not at all considered, right? Because here we want high performance, high speed, at the same time, highly reliable performance. Then there's a real-time clock signal, interrupt signal. So where you can actually generate interrupt every 1 second or every count up or down count. In this case, it is increment thing because time always counts up, it doesn't count down. But you can use the same thing for stopwatch purpose also. So how the stopwatch in your mobile phone works? So you are actually, while you start your stopwatch, the OS, the Android OS or your iOS configures this RTC interrupts. And when the RTC keeps on counting, it is otherwise also always counting time, but it keeps generating the interrupt. So you are actually enabling the RTC interrupt once you start the stopwatch on your phones. And then the OS coordinates with this interrupt, and then it sounds an alarm or shows something, some indication. Then there are system controls for the external interrupts. Then ADC interrupts are available. 2 different ADC interrupts having different numbers. And why ADC 0 and 1 are side by side or one after another, that depends on the choice of the manufacturer again. But more importantly, I can tell you that ADC 0 is given a slightly higher priority. For critical signals, you should be categorizing only or connecting only to ADC 0. But for slow signals, something like you don't need high speed conversion for every voltage signal, such as suppose you are measuring the intensity of sunlight and controlling the solar panel direction towards the sun. So that could be done at a very slow sampling rate. So once every hour is also good enough actually. So for that you should use low priority ADCs. Whereas for high priority, something like you want to measure the number of persons entering a room through some optical sensor, just an example. So you're connecting a photodiode to the output to the ADC by means of a transimpedance in between, because you need to connect, you cannot directly connect a photodiode to an ADC. You have to convert that into voltage. So obviously you have to convert any sensor signal into voltage, which should be fast enough, and then anything up to 2.44 microsecond in this case. So then I2C, and the second channel of I2C, and then brownout detect. So brownout detect is basically whether there is a power supply interruption. So if I experienced brownout sometime back, right? So power cut was happening. Power cut happened at my place, so that's why I was brownout. So that means there is a power disruption. So this power disruption can also come to microcontrollers momentarily, and that should generate interrupt. And why you need to generate interrupt for power cut, momentary power cut? Because you want to save some critical data into flash or some memory or something. So for safety critical applications, you also keep track when how is your power quality, whether the power is getting disrupted or not. So within the chip, we cannot stop this power supply cut, but at least we can detect and save our data before time. Okay, so that's the meaning of this or purpose of this BOD interrupt. Okay, so I actually exceeded the time beyond 9:30. So I'll stop over here with the ARM, and I will jump to your doubts if you have any from the 8051 section. If I cannot answer within the next 12 minutes, I will note it down, and I will arrange along with the TAs to answer them in a written form by today evening. So that's my plan for the test preparation for tomorrow. So just few instructions for the test. Okay. I'll just give you very briefly some instructions about the class test. So tomorrow's class test will be for 1 hour, and that will start at 12 p.m. and the class test mode will be as following. So the class test will have 3 questions. In fact, I have made 5 questions or 5 or 6 questions, I guess. No, 5 questions. So question number 1 and 2 will have 5 marks each. That means 5, 5, 10 for question 1, 5, 5, 10 for question number 2. That is 20 marks. And then question 3 will have the coding problem, which will have 10 marks. And it will be, I'll email the question paper in PDF form just 5 minutes before the class test. That means at around 11:55 a.m. tomorrow, I'll be emailing you the question paper to everyone. And you have to write on your notebook or wherever, loose pages, whatever you like, feel like. This is an open book test. It's an open resource test. Okay, you are free to do discussions also. I don't have any trouble. You can do WhatsApp chat, you can do whatever other means you want to adopt. The objective here is to assess your understanding, your confidence level. Okay, it's not how accurately you are writing the answer. Obviously, accuracy matters, but that's not an absolute measure of your performance. That's one of the pillars of your performance. So you can refer to any internet material, any book, any of my slides, any video, anything. You can discuss among yourself, but you have to make sure that the answering is different. Answering is different in the sense that the approach should be different. The answers, the final things could be slightly similar, but even there are options. I kept room such that you can perform in your own ways. You should apply your own mind. That is important. So references are just for help, but ultimately you have to gain the confidence in this work. So in embedded system industry, no one will test how good is your memory power. Obviously that is important, but that's not the real test in embedded system industries. So they test what are your skills. Okay, so if you are going for a job, they will test your skill level, not your memory level or memory power. So I want to do the same thing. I want to test your skills. So you should read the material. You should study the materials on 8051 and other things that I had circulated. You should be confident. You should know where to look for what information. That is important. Okay, so that means you have to give a glance to every part of the syllabus that we covered until 8051. And you can keep reference to the datasheet and user manual or whatever instruction sets, slides in your as your reference. And now the point is, while writing the code or while answering the questions, try to make your diagrams in your own ways. Simply don't copy from the datasheet or don't write as it is from your friend or whatever other source book. Apply your mind, write in your own way, write in your own through your own taste, through your own presentation skills. Apply your skills. You can use multiple colors if necessary. It is not an absolute expectation from my side. It's just a recommendation to everyone, just to make it more attractive, be more innovative, more interesting way to answer the questions. So the questions are not very lengthy, but they are sort of, I'll say, moderate level lengthy. Okay, so more importantly, so apart from lengthy, you have to manage your time. Time management is important. After completion of 1 hour, you have to scan by using some scanner, using low resolution scanning. Low means not so low that I cannot read it. So it should be moderately low resolution, such that you can fit everything within about 3 megabytes, okay, of file. So you have to compile PDF file within the next 10 minutes after the 1 hour slot. Within that 10 minutes, you have to do the scanning in case you have not started earlier. So, and then you have to upload your document to the Moodle server. So I'll open the Moodle server through a KGP Moodle team. And then you have to upload your PDF, compressed PDF preferably. Don't use very large PDF. Reduce the mobile phone resolution, camera resolution to the extent such that your file size doesn't grow very badly. So keep a PDF scanner, whether it is Cam Scanner or Adobe Scanner or any other software, on your phone, and just write on your notebook or loose sheets all the answers, label all the answers, label all the diagrams, draw the tables. Handwriting should be good enough, but at the same time, you should be fast enough to manage your time. And I wish all the best for the class test tomorrow. And I can tell you the questions are not very difficult, but it will definitely test your skill level. It's not your memory level, but your skill level. For demonstrating your skill, you should be resourceful on one side, and at the same time, you should be able to be smart worker in terms of time as well as resource management. Yeah, so any question regarding the class test?
Sir, I had a doubt.
Yeah.
When it's not very efficient to write codes on paper, especially SMD. So is it possible that, say, I use a debugger or an emulator to write and test the code and just put the screenshot of it?
That's fine. That's acceptable. You can do that. I don't have any objection. You can use any IDE or any debugging interface or any compiling interface, such as Keil or Proteus or any other IAR, and then write code over there, do your checking, compilation, or making the code over there, and then you can keep the screenshot. No problem at all. Okay, so you have to, as a suggestion, just a small suggestion. Yeah, just wait for a moment. It's just a small suggestion. You should keep all my reading materials, all the slides, all the data sheets handy while during the test. Yeah, question please.
Sir, can uploading be done somewhere else, so that, because Moodle usually has some issues while uploading? I don't know, it takes a lot of time for uploading in Moodle.
Let's see. What could be the alternate options? MS Teams. Can you suggest some alternative? Google is not an option because beyond 100 members, Google doesn't allow with the free account. So Moodle, I know Moodle sometimes faces issues. MS Team is another way,
Google-
but
Google
what
Forms.
else?
So in a few subjects, we have been allotted teaching assistants, and we mail our answer sheets to them.
So for smaller student set, that is possible. For such a large set, it is not possible.
Sir, Google
Sir, you could share you could share in MS Teams the Google Forms link so that we can upload it there.
Google Forms, that's the problem, right? The free account that I have with Google doesn't allow more than 100 members to fill up the form. For smaller classes below 100, it is possible, but not.
Sir, you can create a backpack account. Like we have a backpack account in DSP, so you can do that. Backpack is fast.
Oh, what is that? Please write it on the chat. I am not aware of that.
Sir, or you could just provide two sheets, right? Divide the students in 2 or 3 subgroups and give us sheets in those. So you can have like 50, 50, 50 each.
Oh, that's a possibility.